You're sitting in a completely pitch-black theater, a handful of popcorn suspended halfway to your mouth. The projector has abruptly cut out the heavy exit doors, are dead-bolted shut, and unseen figures are hurriedly confiscating the physical film reels from the booth above. Why? Because the images you are about to consume are considered so inherently dangerous, so fundamentally destabilizing to the social order, that a governing body decided your brain simply couldn't be trusted with them. This isn't the opening scene of a dystopian sci-fi novel. This is the historical and ongoing reality of global film censorship. Censorship in the film industry serves as a barometer for societal anxieties and governmental control. When you look closely at what gets locked in the vault, a comprehensive analysis reveals that media is primarily banned or suppressed due to 4 critical factors: state security, religious sensitivities, moral panics, and public safety. Transitioning into the fragile ego of the state, governments hiding their own institutional failures is basically like a restaurant management team throwing a heavy tarp over a raging grease fire in the kitchen and then calmly walking out to tell the dining room that the thick, acrid smoke is just a new, immersive, atmospheric dining experience. Governments frequently suppress footage that exposes institutional failure, human rights abuses, or satirical critiques of leadership. They often utilize censorship to manage national narratives or hide uncomfortable realities. This is political suppression. Pure and simple, where films are suppressed to maintain the status quo or protect the image of the state. To see this in action, take a documentary like Titicut Follies from 1967. This documentary exposed the inhumane conditions at the Bridgewater State Hospital for the criminally insane. The Massachusetts government banned the film for over 2 decades, officially citing patient privacy, though critics argued it was suppressed to hide a profoundly broken system. Or consider No Fire Zone from 2013, a film detailing the final months of the Sri Lankan Civil War. This film captured war crimes and extrajudicial executions. As a direct consequence, it was labeled propaganda by the Sri Lankan government and banned in Malaysia. Yet you don't even need a war zone to trigger a state panic. In Under the Sun from 2015, director Vitaly Mansky used between-takes footage to reveal how the North Korean government scripted and choreographed the daily lives of a typical family. North Korea demanded the footage be destroyed, but it was smuggled out. And then there is the danger of a joke. The Interview from 2014 was a satirical comedy about assassinating Kim Jong-un that triggered a massive international incident. Sony Pictures was hacked by the Guardians of Peace, and North Korea labeled the film an act of war. The Dictator from 2012 faced a similar fate, banned in several Arab countries for its insulting portrayal of authoritarian leadership and cultural stereotypes. Sometimes, moving into the modern era, the threat isn't diplomatic, it's digital. 0 Days from 2016 provided an investigation into the Stuxnet computer worm, a cyber weapon allegedly created by the US and Israel to sabotage Iran's nuclear program. The film highlights the danger of cyber weapons being reverse-engineered. When the digital curtain is pulled back, the state pulls the plug, shifting our focus to playing God. But what happens when the screen offends the divine instead of the diplomats? Films that challenge religious doctrines or depict sacred figures in unconventional ways frequently face global opposition. Portraying a deity with relatable mundane flaws is like walking into a pristine, silent museum and drawing a thick mustache on a priceless Renaissance painting with a permanent marker. Portrayals that humanize sacred figures or challenge theological orthodoxy often trigger bans across Middle Eastern, Asian, and Western nations. As an example, look at the sheer scale of the backlash against The Last Temptation of Christ. The film depicts Jesus struggling with human desires, including a marriage dream sequence. Because of this, it was banned in Turkey, Greece, Mexico, Chile, and the Philippines, and was even firebombed in France. Similarly, the Da Vinci Code suggests a secret bloodline between Jesus and Mary Magdalene. That singular plot point caused it to be banned in Lebanon, Egypt, Jordan, and Sri Lanka. Surprisingly, even comedy gets crucified in this arena. Monty Python's Life of Brian offered a satirical take on a man mistaken for the Messiah. It was banned in Ireland, parts of the UK, and targeted by US religious groups. But the consequences can escalate from protests to severe violence. Innocence of Muslims, a highly offensive, low-budget depiction of Prophet Muhammad, sparked global riots and attacks on US embassies. Meanwhile, Persepolis, noted for its depiction of God and critique of the Iranian Revolution, was banned in Iran, and initially banned in Lebanon and Tunisia. Even perceived unintentional slights carry weight. The Gods Must Be Crazy faced notable bans for cultural misunderstanding and its perceived reinforcement of indigenous stereotypes, despite its comedic intent. If you touch the sacred, you run the risk of getting burned. This brings us to the panic of the grotesque. Forget the sacred, let's plummet straight into the profane. The 1970s and 80s saw a surge in transgressive cinema that pushed the limits of gore, sexual violence, and psychological terror, leading to the video nasties crackdown in the United Kingdom. The video nasties era and the suppression of extreme cinema highlight a conflict between artistic freedom and the perceived need to protect the public from psychologically damaging violence or obscenity. To truly understand this, imagine making a film so intensely realistic that the authorities genuinely believe you murdered your cast on camera. That is exactly what happened with Cannibal Holocaust in 1980. The film was famous for real animal killings and such convincing found footage that director Ruggero Deodato was arrested on suspicion of murdering his actors. He was only cleared after the actors appeared in court to prove they were still breathing. Decades later, the Blair Witch Project from 1999 utilized a similar strategy. While not banned, its marketing led many to believe the actors were actually dead, causing police investigations and audience confusion. Furthermore, then there is the censorship of severe psychological and graphic horror. Stanley Kubrick himself requested that his film A Clockwork Orange from 1971 be withdrawn from the UK in 1973 following threats against his family and claims that the film inspired copycat violence. The Exorcist from 1973 caused a massive moral panic due to its graphic depictions of demonic possession. The backlash was so intense, it was unavailable on home video in the UK for 15 years. And the Texas Chainsaw Massacre from 1974 was banned in many countries not for explicit gore, of which there is surprisingly little, but for its relentless atmosphere of dread and nihilism. In fact, when directors lean into transgressive bad taste, the bans follow swiftly. Pink Flamingos from 1972, directed by John Waters, features incest, bestiality, and the lead actress consuming real dog feces. It was intended as a rebellion against good taste and remains restricted in several countries. Or take Sallow, or The 120 Days of Sodom from 1975, a brutal allegory for fascism featuring systematic torture and humiliation. Today, it is considered one of the most censored films in history. The establishment decides when a nightmare becomes too vivid for the waking world. This reveals a secondary motive, protecting us from ourselves. So, they ban the hyperviolent and they ban the profane. But what if the movie isn't visually horrific? What if it's just a terrifying warning? Some films are suppressed because they threaten public health or morale during sensitive geopolitical eras. Depictions of inevitable catastrophe, such as nuclear war or the spread of medical misinformation, have led to preemptive bans to prevent civil unrest or public health crises. Consider the implications. Imagine a weather forecast so apocalyptic that the meteorologist is physically detained just for reading it aloud. That was the cultural impact of the war game from 1965. A realistic mockumentary of a nuclear strike on Britain. The BBC and the British government banned it from television for 20 years, fearing it would destroy public morale and induce panic. Across the Ocean, the day after from 1983 was a TV movie about nuclear war in Kansas that was so distressing, it reportedly gave President Ronald Reagan second thoughts about nuclear policy. In modern times, the threat to public safety comes from bad data. Vaxxed from 2016, directed by the discredited Dr. Andrew Wakefield, promotes the debunked link between the MMR vaccine and autism. It was aggressively removed from streaming services and theaters to prevent the spread of dangerous medical misinformation. Censorship also extends to enforcing regional social norms. Brokeback Mountain from 2005 was banned in China, the Middle East, and parts of Southeast Asia due to its depiction of a same-sex relationship, highlighting global disparities in LGBTQ+ acceptance. If an idea is deemed contagious, it gets quarantined. Ultimately, this leads to rewriting history. But what happens when the reality they are trying to manage isn't a future threat, but a ghost from the past? Films that revisit historical atrocities often face censorship based on how they represent victims and perpetrators. The act of killing from 2012 took a radical approach by inviting former Indonesian death squad leaders to reenact their crimes in the style of their favorite film genres. Because the perpetrators still held positions of power, the film was never officially banned but was screened underground in Indonesia. The Soviet Story from 2008, a Latvian documentary highlighting Soviet atrocities and ideological links between the USSR and Nazi Germany, was harshly condemned in Russia as anti-Russian propaganda. Delving deeper, sometimes the stylistic choice of remembering is what triggers the ban. Mouse from 2008, based on the graphic novel, portrays the Holocaust using mice to represent Jews and cats to represent Nazis. It faced bans for being too intense for schools, and for its unique, potentially confusing animal-based portrayal of genocide. And sometimes, mere existence is deemed too shocking. Freaks from 1932 used real sideshow performers with physical disabilities. The sympathetic portrayal and the disturbing appearance of the cast led to the film being CUT by 30 minutes, and banned in the UK for 3 decades. In conclusion, history isn't just written by the victors, it's aggressively edited by the censors. Censorship is ultimately like trying to squeeze water out of a dry lemon. The more intensely a governing body applies pressure to hide an ugly truth, the more painfully obvious their desperation becomes to everyone watching. Would you like me to elaborate on the psychological impact these bans have on the audiences who eventually uncover these hidden films?